Hello, and welcome to this installment of Frank and Mary. I am Shelby Marshall, and I am usually co-hosting the show with Arthur Bergeron, who is a local attorney here with Myrick O'Connell. He practices elder law, but for those of you that have watched the show, you know that this show is not about elder law. It's about Arthur's friends, Frank and Mary. And Frank and Mary are fictional characters who live here in Westborough. And their goal is to live here and play and enjoy life here in Westborough and be buried in their backyard. Although we've never talked about that, whether or not that's legal or not. Maybe that's for another installment. During these times of COVID, Arthur and I have been bringing a weekly show to our audience to keep them current on what's going on in the town and to continue to create and foster, community connections. So we have an amazing guest on today, Anthony Vaver, who is our local historian and archivist, and I'll allow him to introduce himself and tell us all about him. First of all, good morning, Anthony.
Hi, how are you?
Great. The reason why he was invited on, and I guess I should back up and say Arthur's on vacation today, so it's not like, he's off in the background and we're not allowing him to talk, but he's on a much deserved vacation, and maybe we'll watch this in a couple days on the rerun. But I asked Anthony to come on today. For many of you, you may be familiar with or have heard that there's been some discussion about the idea of changing our town seal in Westborough, specifically because it has a cotton gin on it. And Anthony's going to tell us all about that, so I don't want to jump in. But I think it's important anytime we talk about changing history, and this is something that the Board of Selectmen have heard about so far, and ultimately will probably go to town meeting. What needs to go to town meeting for it to change. The voters, our legislative body, will ultimately determine that path, A, whether or not it should change, and B, what the design will be. But I think before we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I think it's important that we understand history in its context, and so that's why Anthony's on TV. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shelby.
Yeah, so let's just kind of jump into it. You recently posted some information on Facebook, which I found fascinating. It was provided history and context of our seal. So tell us about, how long have town seals been around? What's the history of it? What's the purpose of it?
Sure, I will. I'm going to start off just, if I could back up just a second, because my title is a local history librarian. And so I don't consider myself a town historian.
Sorry.
Certainly, well, that's fine. And this happens all the time. Even though I consider myself a cultural historian, I really haven't devoted my scholarly efforts to Westborough in particular, in the way that, say, Chris Allen or Phil Kittredge and some of the other town historians, I consider them,
Okay.
Or into that. Being a librarian, I'm the kind of person who directs people to that information. And so certainly as I do that, I'm picking up a lot about Westborough history. And so
that's an important distinction. Thank you for making that, because I wasn't aware of that. So I think it's important
all the time.
Yeah,
and so, but the reason why that's significant is because, as you were saying, is that I've been getting some questions since this controversy arose about the town seal. And so I had opportunity to do a little research and to figure out and answer some of those questions. So basically, it comes the way that I see it in terms of framing the issue of the town seal comes down to three issues. One is the town seal itself and its history and why we even have a town seal. Then Eli Whitney and the cotton gin, because that's why we're here talking about it, is that our town seal currently has a picture of Eli Whitney's cotton gin on it. And then finally, the role that seals and symbols have, and what's their purpose? Why do we have them in our society? So those are kind of the three issues that I see working at play here when we talk about our town seal. So I'll talk a little bit about the town seal itself. In 1899, the General Court of Massachusetts mandated that every town and city in Massachusetts had to have a seal. I I'm not exactly sure why that was the case. They decided that this was so important. I don't know if it was like the design lobby or something that got in there and said we need more more business. But anyway, so in 1899, all towns had to design and have a seal. And so uh, in 1913 was the first time that I saw the town seal being used in Westborough's annual town report. So I'm going to share that with you right now.
This is when we wait for, there we go. Perfect.
Yep, okay. So that's that was the very first town seal that we had here in Westborough. And as you can see, it's pretty generic. It has a to our modern eyes, it's kind of an antique feel to it. It's a little Victorian. And so, but that was our town seal up until 1967. And so I'm going to go stop sharing that. So in 1967 was the 250th anniversary of our town and the celebration. And so they decided as a part of that celebration that they would actually change the town seal. So they had the anniversary commission asked art students from the Westborough High School to submit ideas and designs for the new seal. And in the end, they decided that they were going to create a composite of 4 designs. One of them was the, and here, why don't I put that up as well so we can all see what we're talking about here.
Yep.
So one of them was the tower on the town hall. Another was the outline of the Westborough map that proclaims us as the 100th town in Massachusetts. The third is a pie crust that goes around the periphery of the town seal. And then, of course, the Eli Whitney's cotton gin. And so they decided to put those all together onto one of the, to create a town seal. And that appeared on the cover of the commemorative booklet for that anniversary. But also at on the back of the booklet, they also, I'm going to put another, they had another design.
I understand that this was part of the 200th celebration. Was it formally adopted by the town through the town meeting process at that time? Do we know that?
Oh gosh, I haven't really looked through that. I'm assuming that it did.
Yeah.
But
I guess that's a follow-up item for all of us. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So so what I'm sharing now, do you see the picture? So that was on the back of the commemorative booklet, and that was also as part of the design. It must have been submitted as well. And so they actually created a commemorative coin that had the town seal and then this picture on the back of that coin. And so we actually have one of those coins in the archives at the Westborough Public Library. And so once we open up again, if anybody's interested, I'd be more than happy to pull that out and to show it to folks. So that became basically the seal for our town from that point forward. It was just meant as for whatever reason, the folks in 1967 decided that the seal that we had before wasn't doing it for them. And so they decided they were going to create a new one. And so that's the one that we have now. Let's stop sharing here. So then that brings us to Eli Whitney and his relationship to Westborough and the history of the cotton gin. So Eli Whitney was born in Westborough on December 8th in 1765. And his mother was Betsy Fay, and she was one of the first straw hat producers here in Westborough. And in fact, Eli Whitney Jr. Was so prolific or at an early age, he tinkered around a lot, and so he helped develop hat pins that helped her out with her business, and um, he also tinkered around and produced nails, because I guess nails were in big supply or big need during the American Revolution. And his father, Eli Whitney Sr., he was a mechanically inclined farmer. His father was also very active in town. So he was a selectman. And so when I first came into this position and was going through the town documents, I saw Eli Whitney's name all over the place. And I got really excited thinking, oh my gosh, this is the Eli Whitney, the inventor. And it turns out that it's his father who is just so active. And so his signature appears all over the place. So Eli Whitney ended up leaving Westborough for good in 1789 at the age of 23 to attend Yale College. And so after he graduated from college, he moved down to Georgia, and he received a patent for his cotton gin in 1794. Now, the reason why this cotton gin was so important is because the cotton that was grown in the South was a different kind of cotton that was grown over in India. At the time, India was, for the longest time, had really dominated the cotton industry. And so, but they had cotton gins well before Eli Whitney. And so India had cotton gins, and they would separate the cotton from the seeds. But the problem was that the strain of cotton that was grown in the American South, the cotton clung to the seeds much more tightly than the Indian cotton. So the India cotton gin was not able to separate those two. So when Eli Whitney came up with his invention, suddenly that was able to separate the two. And so whereas it would take a full day for one person basically to separate the seeds from 1 pound of cotton, with his device, basically the cotton industry, it increased production by 4,900%. So I guess if you do the math, if you could do 1 pound of cotton per day for one person, with his invention, you could do 4,900 pounds of cotton in one day.
Now it becomes more of a supply. We need to pick more cotton,
exactly,
right, to get it and obviously man the machine. But now we need more cotton because we're able to do that much faster.
That's right, and there's a huge demand worldwide for cotton textiles. And so now it's a race to be able to produce as much cotton as they possibly could. Well, these cotton growers obviously relied on slaves to produce the cotton, to separate the cotton, and so so it also increased and spread slavery throughout the entire South at a pace that, whereas it was really beginning to start to wane at that time. Slavery was beginning to, as an economic system, not to be quite as successful as one might think it could be, at least in the way the American economy was working and working towards industrialization. But with Eli Whitney's machine, it now made slavery much more profitable and really ended up spreading it.
And a need. I mean, there was a functional need, not, to have individuals that could do the work, right?
That's right.
So, yeah.
That's right. Well, it turns out that even though Eli Whitney was a great inventor and tinkerer, that he wasn't such a great businessman. He and his partner decided that rather than sell cotton gins directly to the producers and the farmers to be able to separate the two, they decided to go with a model that was kind of like with grist mills or wheat mills, where they would actually do the separating for the farmers. So they would take the cotton in, produce it and make their money that way. Well, the problem is that the design of the cotton gin really is not that complicated, and so so people were able to produce their own versions of it, and so they ended up using all their profits to fight patent infringement.
Piracy in its early days, right?
Exactly, and they ended up going bankrupt as a result of that. So their business went under. I think it was in 1797. So pretty soon after the invention came out. So Eli Whitney, he also was known for developing the notion of interlocking parts for guns. There's a little bit of controversy there because certainly the idea for that had existed before that time, but but I guess he was the one that was really credited for creating that idea and reproducing that idea on a broad scale. And the importance with that is that before that time period, guns were pretty much individually produced, which again, lots of time. But if you could produce each of those parts and you could take one part off and put the exact same part back into it, now you can produce a lot of guns and a lot of
produce more, repair others, many purposes.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So Eli Whitney died at the age of 59 in 1825, and he's buried in New Haven, Connecticut. From going through the whole history here, we can see that while he was born in Westborough, we might say that his relationship to our town is somewhat tangential, maybe circumstantial, because certainly our town really didn't have any strong connection to the cotton gin as an invention. We were merely the place where he was born. So, so that's, what it's worth. So that's kind of Eli Whitney's story.
Thank you.
Yep.
So and interesting, because I was not aware of his parents' connection to the town. So that's that's just a whole other piece of information I'm sure our viewers will find of interest, and certainly the Fay name continues even kind of presently through families that are here today. So I think the other piece of this you were talking about is kind of our connection kind of to the role of seals and symbols.
That's right. That's right. And, a lot of times, I think it's really important when we're talking about history that history is very complicated. And so we want to be very precise in the kind of terms that we use. And very often I hear when we're discussing symbols and monuments, like say, especially with some of the controversy with the Confederate monuments, that's the phrase that somehow we're erasing history by removing them. But I think when we talk about history, we want to be very careful about what we're talking about, because history is actually a practice. It's not really a collection of events and dates. So it's not merely a chronicling of, events that happened in the past, and because our interpretation of those events are always being shaped by our ever-evolving perceptions over time. So as time goes on, we get a different framework for understanding that history. We have different kinds of research comes up. If we think about the way that events happen in our lives, very often we're just reacting to events as they happen to us. We know that for sure now with the coronavirus pandemic, right? Where suddenly we're scrambling and we're trying to make the best decisions that we can. However, over time, we can then look back at those decisions and we get a better framework for understanding. So the irony is that the further away we actually get from an event and away from under its shadow, we actually come to a better understanding of what the meaning of that event is. So because of that, our notions of what happens in history is always changing. It's never fossilizes into that kind of, stones thing of here's what happened in the past and we can't change it, because we're all looking at it in a different kind of way.
and that is what I hear, even in my own personal conversations with folks as we talk about, we'll use the Confederate statues as the example, and, the fear of erasing history by taking them down. And then the follow-on comment that I've heard, 100 times and even thought myself of, well, of course, that was then, and we think differently now, and the statue is, you sort of get wrapped up in maybe it's just symbolic. It was just them, but of course we wouldn't erect a Confederate statue now because we've learned from that.
Right.
But it's interesting. I love that. That we have a much better understanding and perspective the further we get from those historical events, right?
Right.
I even think about 9/11, right? So
Yeah.
how we thought about that in those moments, those immediate months, years, days from that event, and how we think of that now, and what has transpired even in terms of how we've treated people that our Muslim Islamic friends and brothers and sisters. Very different perspective than kind of those immediate days following. So very, very complicated. And I've never thought of history as a process. I gotta think about that one.
Yeah, yeah. So there were two things that come out of what you're saying, and that's the public nature of these, right? Is that we create monuments, we create symbols, and we put them in public places, on parks and government documents and so on, because these symbols are meant to represent who we are, what we aspire to be, what we think of ourselves as a community, and we put them in public places to help remind us of the fact that that these are our values, that these are our shared values, and so there can become times where those symbols and those in the public are no longer representing us because things change over time. They just do. And so, but we actually have a mechanism in place to be able to handle that kind of situation. And that mechanism is that we can take these symbols and we can put them in public cultural institutions. Namely, we have museums, we have libraries, we have archives. That's the purpose of them. And in fact, it doesn't even have to be a symbol. Anything that is important to our culture that no longer has a utilitarian purpose to it, what we do is we take those and we put them in our cultural institutions.
I think Smithsonian, right?
The Smithsonian.
Oh my God.
Westborough Public Library,
Yeah.
Right? And so that we can gain a better understanding of why we had those symbols up, what they served, and perhaps why they no longer do so. So once again, we're not really erasing history here. We're actually engaging in history, and we actually have practices and cultural places where we can put that history and have it live on and not bury it. And that is in our cultural institutions. And that's why it's important for us to have libraries and to have these kinds of spaces for us. In the same way that it's really important for us to have these monuments and these symbols to remind us of who we are.
Yeah, and
so, yep.
I want to just add on to that, just to your point about having spaces where people can go and appreciate it, study it, maybe touch it, feel it. And the library, I always took it for granted. Okay, any town has a library, whatever, but it's a free, welcome, public resource with that you are free to go in and say, I want to understand our Confederate history, and you are free to do that with all the privacy that you are entitled to do that, and the protection under that. And there's, I don't know, it's kind of like that, like there's really strong roots in kind of in our democracy. Like, to me, like when you walk through those doors, there's a freedom and a liberation of what you can explore and engage in. So
right, and I'd be remiss to say that being a librarian, that if people are have questions about this process or about the history or about any of these kinds of issues, that they really should come to the library. That we have librarians I am there as well to help out and direct you to resources that can answer some of these questions. That's why we're there, and that's also part of our purpose.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure, and thank you for saying that, because I think, going into a library and being kind of looking through the stacks and the various media that's available, and certainly our archives, can be intimidating. So we should tap into great people like yourselves who have experience and can understand the initial question and press a little bit more. Like, what are you really looking for? What's your real question or questions, right?
That's right. And I've been trying my best to try to minimize that intimidation factor, because I know that archives do, because we have all these rules, right? Because we're dealing with precious things.
Right.
But these things are really there for people to come and enjoy and to look at. And so if anybody is interested in, again, it's a little tough right now, right? Because we're all locked away. But once we do open up, and people can come in, to stop by the local history spot. We call it the Westborough Center for History and Culture, in the Westborough Public Library, and it's right past the circulation desk. So especially if I'm there, please pop in, say hi. I'm always thrilled when people come in, and I'm always and love showing them around and showing all the neat stuff that we have locked away there. But certainly other librarians can also help you out if I'm not around when I'm in that room.
Well, we've been known to take Frank and Mary on the road, so I think you've given us an idea for, once things are open again, to bring the show to the center, to see it and understand what's there. And clearly I know you in a number of different lights and venues, Anthony, and you're clearly a happy, smiley guy and welcoming to everyone. So I'm so glad you came on. I know I've learned a lot on this program and today, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. So thank you for being our guest.
Well, thank you so much, Shelby, for having me on here to talk about these things.
All right. Well, we'll definitely have you back. All right. Thank you so much for watching today's installment of Frank and Mary, and we'll look forward to seeing you or you seeing us on the next show. Thanks.